Welcome to Revolutionary Health Live, the show that focuses on Black gay men's health and wellness. I'm your host, Michael Ward, and I just want to say happy Pride Month and thank you so much for joining us again tonight. Make sure you stay up to date on everything that we have going on all our social media at CNP Tribe. And if you're tuned in live, make sure that you comment, ask questions. We want to interact with you. If it's not live and it's after the fact, make sure that you still comment, like, subscribe, share the conversation. Tell a friend. We want this to go beyond just tonight here. So make sure that you again follow us on all our social media. I'm so very excited for tonight's conversation. I'm welcoming back Robert Suttle. He's a social justice educator and activist, and we're going to continue our dialogue on the work of HIV criminal law reform. And if you don't know who Mr. Robert Suttle is, I'll give you a little background. He's a student affairs practitioner in higher education and a respected leader and activist in the HIV racial justice and decriminalization movement for over a decade. As well, he's a founding member of the SERO Project, an advisor of HIV Justice Network's Global Advisory Panel, GAP, and chair of the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation's Council of Justice Leaders. So I'm very excited to welcome you back to the show, Mr. Robert Suttle.
Hey, Michael.
Hey, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty well. It's good to be back with you. It's always exciting to have conversation with you. Also, I appreciate you all wanting to continue this dialogue with me today. So.
Yes, and I'm so excited to have you back, definitely, so we can have this conversation. So I like to start off basic just for the people that may not know exactly what HIV criminalization means or even decriminalization. So can you just give us a little overview essentially of what that is?
Yeah, HIV criminalization basically is the prosecution and punishment of people living with HIV for either exposing people to HIV, perhaps a perceived exposure, and for not disclosing one's HIV status to someone, or perceived exposure, or possibly even transmission of HIV. And so if you are a person living with HIV, and you actively know that you are a person living with HIV, you actually engage in sex, and yet you do not disclose your HIV status prior to engaging in these acts, you could be potentially criminally liable here in the US, as well as in other parts of the world. And also HIV criminalization, currently now a little less than 30 laws. We've had some states to recently change or modify their law that exists in the state. Several states in the South and several all over across the country. Let me just put it that way instead of being specific regionally. These laws do not require criminal intent. As I said before, if you're a person living with HIV, you know it. You actively engage in sexual activity without disclosing, or someone feels you're not disclosing it or exposing them, you could be potentially liable, criminally liable, and face years in prison. For me, it was up to 10 years in the state of Louisiana, but in other states could be just that much or even more, depending on what that case is. Also, there are HIV-specific laws in these various states. There are also people can be punished, living with HIV can be punished under general criminal laws as well. And also, if you're a person that engages in prostitution or any type of solicitation, there are also sentence enhancements. If you are in fact arrested for, let's say, prostitution or soliciting or what have you, and they happen to find out that you're also HIV positive, they test you, then there could be a sentence enhancement based on that finding. So HIV is the only disease that's pretty much singled out because of the stigma of HIV. You know, it's believed that it was gay people that sort of created this disease, if you will, or it came from homosexual behavior. And, you know, the idea is that, you know, because HIV does exist and it happens to gay people or anyone within the LGBTQ community, that this is like a punishment, right? So, you know, there's all sorts of misconceptions. There's all sorts of people's own opinions about HIV. It's not really based in science. That's why we're doing this work to modernize these laws so that they reflect the science, and that we know if people who have access to treatment, who are on treatment and able to achieve a level of undetectability, that they cannot transmit the virus to another person. And so this idea is not reflected in the science. That is science. It's not reflected in the law. Let me say that correctly. It's not reflected in the law, and that's why it's important that we do this work to educate people, legislators, policy people, all the stakeholders about what HIV criminalization is and what's the problem with it. And I had another point that I wanted to mention about that. You asked about decriminalization. Yes. So we want to undo these laws and addressing the harm that it does to just a community of people living with HIV. So it's not just people living with HIV, but it's also the LGBTQ community. And it's also the Black community, the Black and Brown community, who bear the brunt of HIV incidences disproportionately compared to our counterparts. And so in the South, where I'm particularly from, when you have HIV as prevalent as it is, and you have the criminalization or the criminal legal system or these laws that criminalize people, it's 1 in 2. CDC says it's 1 in 2 that Black men that would contract HIV in their lifetime. And then for incarceration, it's 1 in 3 Black men will be incarcerated in their lives starting at the age of 21. So if you put that together, it's like the perfect storm. And there's just a lot that goes in understanding these laws. Not many people are aware that they're a felon. Well, one, that these laws exist and how and what behaviors make them liable. And then 2, they're not aware that it's a felony. And 3, you can literally go to prison for years, and in some states it may require that you register on the sex offender registry. So there's a lot there that many people aren't aware of. Some may think that it's a myth, and some may think that they might have heard about it but never really knew anyone or knew anything about it. But it does exist, it does happen, and there's definitely is a movement that exists that's been in existence for at least over 10 years since I've been involved to address these laws. Because when these laws were created in the late 80s and early 90s, they were created with the intent to help stop slow or stop the transmission of HIV. But we find that it's been counterproductive. It has not done that. And so it's not really been good practice for public health. And the thing is, these legislators in these states, because these are state-based laws, these are not federal laws, they never went back to really look at these laws until just a few short years back, when we started this momentum, building the momentum around bringing awareness and start addressing these laws.
Definitely. Thank you so much. And thank you as well for the work that you're doing to modernize these laws. Because as you said, a lot of it isn't based in science, it's stigma. And so I know we wanted to as well lift up some of the people who have been affected by these laws. For people that may not know, as you said, this is not a myth. This is very real, that there are people who are facing these laws that are out there. Just to shed light on some of those cases. I know Free Nushan Day of Action was earlier this month. As well, and we want to lift up some others. So can you just talk a little bit about what's going on with this case and some others for people that may not be aware of those as well?
Well, I will say this, for example, with Nushan Williams' case has been in the media for a number of years, and he is a person living with HIV. And the thing for you to understand really is that Nushan has done his time. He's done his time for whatever he was convicted of. And he is now being put in civil confinement, or has been in civil confinement, and they're not releasing him. And we can assume for various reasons they consider him to be a threat to the community. But this young man has been incarcerated for many years. So I encourage you to go to freenushan.com if you're wanting to learn more about his story. But that's the point. The point of the matter is that I am Nushan with, that could be me. Thankfully, I am out of prison. I served 6 months in a Louisiana prison. Actually, I was released from prison 10 years ago in January of 2011. So I'm grateful that I can sit here today and talk about this issue. But there are other people who are still incarcerated for a number of years. Some people have had 30 plus years incarcerated. There are those that have been convicted in the military. There's those that are women that are living with HIV for various reasons. They have engaged either in sex work. So there's a variety of there are people who have been born with HIV who have faced prosecution. So it's not a particular type of look or group of people, if you will, based on race or anything, or gender, anything like that. It affects all people. And however, because of how our country is structured, due to racism and institutional racism, that it definitely impacts people who will come from politically and vulnerable communities and have bad experiences with law enforcement already, even before their, HIV, or even now, if they face an encounter with law enforcement. So it's not just any particular type of people. It's any and all of us. However, it is important to recognize that, yes, we're looking at police brutality and all those things. Just throw HIV criminalization in there. And that's also what we're fighting for when we talk about Black Lives Matter, because this epidemic definitely impacts our community. The criminal legal system definitely impacts our community. And so these are also, if you're not aware, these are things that we need to be also fighting for justice for.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. And thank you so much for sharing your story as well. If you're just tuning in, I am sitting with Robert Suttle, social justice educator and activist as well, as we talk about decriminalizing HIV and the criminal law reform. So make sure you drop your questions in the chat so we can make sure to get as many answered as possible. And I love asking questions as well when I know I have shows coming up, and when people saw that you were coming too. A lot of questions that I have from people that didn't even know here in Atlanta, Georgia, where I'm currently living, that there was on the books. In my personal experience as well, when I was diagnosed with HIV and still in my state of shock, is that, they slid me this paper and they're like, okay, well, just sign or whatever it is. I didn't know what I was signing, only later to find out. It's an understanding that I now have an HIV diagnosis and that it is a crime if I don't disclose my status. So a lot of people wanted to know, for people living with HIV, what are some ways that we can protect ourselves and kind of educate ourselves more on these laws?
Yeah, I would say that, for those that are newly diagnosed that are just unaware, because they don't really talk about this at the time when you're either getting tested. But if you're newly diagnosed, what's important is that you take the time that you need to get yourself together, to heal yourself to a point where you can feel confident in yourself and build your self-esteem, as a result of, all the things, all the feelings that we feel and that we go through, and understand that you're not alone in your being newly diagnosed, or however many years you've been diagnosed. So I would say just give yourself space and time there to just wrap your mind around what you've experienced and what you're going through, what you're living with. And then when you've reached that point, you want to educate yourself. And this is something that I'd say to everybody. A lot of people know that they're living with HIV, but they're not educated about HIV, meaning understanding the science, the real risk and routes of transmission of HIV. And I think it is important to understand that the more you know, the more empowered you feel, the more knowledgeable you feel, because you're out there living your life, and you may come across people who think they know what HIV, and they may not be living with, but they know so much about it, but they've not really, they don't know a whole lot about it, but you're living with it. And I think that if you take the time to really educate yourself about it, because there's so much information out there that you have access to it. If you're able to get on the internet, you can find this information. Take the time to read and learn about what it is that you're diagnosed with, because that's going to help you understand how HIV criminalization, because that's another thing you got to understand. I always say, before you can talk about HIV criminalization, you got to talk about HIV, and then you can move to talking about HIV criminalization. Because that in itself, there's a whole lot to learn. There's laws and understanding sort of the elements and things that, like, how does one get to be criminalized, and what does that mean? What does that look like in the United States? What resources are out there for you? How is the movement addressing these issues? What are the, like, talking points and things like that? So there's a lot there to learn in itself. So it's so important to, one, learn about HIV, to move to learning about HIV criminalization, then also in that learning what communities, what groups of people are impacted. We're 40 years into the epidemic, so that's 40 years of knowledge that you might want to learn about, and learn about the activists and the other people who have been involved in the HIV movement, from women to gay men to sex workers to trans people. Like, there's all kind of people that have been involved in this movement, people of color that have been involved in this movement. And we give props to those that were instrumental in fighting to make sure that we get treatment, since the beginning, through ACT UP and all of that activism. But I'm also passionate about learning about the Black and Brown community, the people who were not at the forefront, but definitely were there, involved in the movement, and the ways in which they've contributed and how they were able to overcome those challenges that they face, as a person of color, as a Black person coming through the epidemic. So these are things that you need to do to be knowledgeable, and those things will help you protect yourself, as well as being knowledgeable. Then too, if you are personally with HIV, you don't necessarily have to disclose your status to anyone, contrary to what the law says. And I know I'm saying this, but what I mean is, you don't have to tell people things that you're not ready to do so. So that may mean changing some behaviors that you have, or some habits that you may have, so that you're not put in a position to have to, be manipulated in terms of sharing your information, because it is your information, it is your right, it is your privacy. And, that may mean restraining from sexual acts or desires right on, until you get to know a person well enough. Because there are a lot of people that, I mean, it happened to me, and I'm not trying to, throw shade on anybody, but you never know who you're dealing with. And, and that could go both ways. And you want to be comfortable to be able to express yourself in disclosing your status to an individual who can handle that information. Not everyone can handle your truth. So you might want to be careful about who you're engaging with. And if you find yourself involved in a relationship, take your partner to your doctor's appointments with you, so that it'll be open, in front of a third party, so that the information about your status, about your health, can be disclosed in a sort of open, healthy and safe environment, confidential environment between you, your partner, and your provider. Also, if you are disclosing through texts and emails or what have you, videos, continue to do that. However, there are instances where that can backfire, to show that, oh yes, you are indeed HIV positive, and you knew it because you said it here. So that depends on, how the information will be used in court, but I still encourage it. I still encourage you to do that as a means of documenting whether you disclose your status. You don't want to tell law enforcement that you're HIV positive, because they're out there to serve and protect, but they ain't knowledgeable. They're not knowledgeable about HIV. In fact, they're scared. They say they're scared that they're going to be killed when they're out on the street, but just think about, if you told me you're HIV positive, they're going to really be scared. So I say that to say that you can't tell them that information either, because, depending on how that interaction may go, you could find yourself either being charged, or they may feel like you're trying to, get over on them. So I encourage you to just, share your information in a way that is safe, with people you can trust, because right now they want us to disclose their status, but it's not legally safe to do that. So we have to do it in a way that protects us as much as possible. And so the things that I just mentioned should help you out in the most, for the most part. So.
Yeah, definitely. And some great resources. Educate as well in the chat. That we have links to the Center for HIV Law and Policy, as well as SERO Project, to educate yourself, and as well everything that you share. We definitely appreciate. We do have a question I want to bring in.
Yes.
Alfred Dwight, that says, how can one personally get more involved in this movement as well?
Well, depending on what state you are in, there might be a coalition that exists. Coalitions have been building since 2014, if I'm not mistaken. And so, depending on what state you're in, Alfred, there might be a coalition there. And if so, I can definitely connect you, or CNP definitely can connect you to that coalition, or to the whoever's leading that coalition. And if not there, then I can definitely, connect you with either the closest state, or even whatever, some national organizations that are doing HIV criminalization work. We have the Health Not Prisons Collective, and so that's Positive Women's Network, that's Counter Narrative Project, or CNP. Um, Positive Women, SERO, Transgender Law Center, and then there's also the United States People Living with HIV Caucus. And so if there's not a coalition in your state, there's definitely a national organization members or national organizations that exist that you can follow to learn more information.
Yes, thank you for that question, Alfred, as well. Brooke, thank you as well for dropping the link in the chat and for interacting with us. So make sure if you have any questions, comments, that you drop those in so we can squeeze as many in as possible while we have the time. And we have you here because I'm so very appreciative that we get to continue this discussion with you.
Yeah.
One of the questions as well that I have is how can modernizing these laws assist us in ending the HIV epidemic, especially here in the South, when we see that so many Black men are still being diagnosed with HIV. How can we use this as a platform to end the epidemic, which I know is one of our goals here with HIV?
Yeah, I'm glad that that is a goal. I kind of push back a little bit, thinking that HIV is going to always be among us. I guess I'm just more of a pragmatist when it comes to that, just being realistic. But it's still a worthy goal, and I think moving these laws, removing the felony, definitely lessens the barrier, if not removes the barrier. Because people, if they're finding out about HIV criminalization today, they're definitely going to have some fear, about either getting tested. If they're really getting knowledgeable about this information. I know I would be, if I had learned about it. I'd probably be a little bit apprehensive about doing certain things because of just the liability, how easy it is, literally. Um, and so that helps remove a barrier. Happily, perhaps we won't have many people who are impacted by HIV going to prison and getting felonies on their record, and ruining their lives and their futures. So that, I just see it as a way of removing a big barrier, and lessening the stigma, because the way the narrative is out there is that if you're Black or if you're living with HIV, you're a dangerous person, and that is not true. And it is not true. And if you live in the South, that is the narrative that has been in existence for decades now. And I'm just tired of it. And I hate that I got caught up in this, and it's all because of this lie, through white supremacy, that they're telling and giving a narrative about Black people, and therefore they decide to create laws that not only are against people living with HIV, but also against Black people living with HIV. So it's just another way to criminalize Black people. And so I'm just like connecting the dots here and learning the history. And so I think, removing these laws, or the felony, definitely creates a less of a barrier, and hopefully eradicates the stigma that comes with it, and brings us into a space where we're recognizing that things happen to people. And it's not like we created HIV, structurally, because of the infrastructure that exists, and because of all the isms and the cultural conservatism and the religious intolerance that exists. That is the stuff that has created these things these situations that we're in. And then they want to create this infrastructure that doesn't support us and allows us to be exposed to all sorts of elements. And then you want to turn around and create a law around it too. Like they're basically trying to destroy us on both hands, and that's not right. And it's definitely, I feel it's very unconstitutional, and it's definitely not a good human rights practice. So I like to think that by removing the laws, that it gives people the liberty to know that HIV is not what we thought it was. This demonizing attitude that we have around HIV, that if a person's living with it, that they're not a danger, not a threat. They're people that need to be treated with respect and dignity, and so that they can live their lives fully.
Yeah, because again, like we said just a while ago, I mean, these are laws that are affecting real people. Real people like yourself have been affected by these and are now sitting behind bars because of those things, because of the stigma and not the science. And I know as well, National HIV Testing Day is coming up. So I definitely encourage people to get tested for HIV. But the stigma around it, and even knowing what your HIV status may be, may deter people with these laws when they find out about HIV criminalization. And as well, I know another resource or ways that people can get educated is the HIV is Not a Crime conference, and some of that work will close out as well. What are you currently doing in ways that we can support you personally in this movement?
I'm sorry, repeat your question again, Mike.
I was saying with the HIV is Not a Crime conference, I know that's another educational resource with people. Before we close out, we're saying, what are some ways that we can support this work and you personally? Where can we find you? Any last thoughts, comments?
Okay, so yes, the HIV Not a Crime conference just happened earlier this month virtually. They're probably going to be planning for the next one in 2023. Yeah, it's every 2 years. So I encourage you to go on Facebook and follow that Facebook group. HIV is Not a Crime. They're also on Instagram and I believe Twitter as well. So that could be a great place to start, just to have that in your media. I strongly encourage it. It's a broad base of community organizations involved in the planning of that conference, training academy. And so what you do, you learn all the skills and strategies that you need, and you go back to your state, you work within your coalition, and you do the work on the ground to modernizing the laws in your state. Each state is different. Their political realities is different. So each state face different challenges. However, this model of HIV decriminalization does work. It does work. It's just you have to tailor it to your state and whatever that reality is. In terms of me, I'm I'm not affiliated with an organization as of yet. I since have left the SERO Project. And so I'm kind of just sort of being a free agent right now with exploring what I want to do in my future. I want to continue to educate people on all sorts of social justice issues, not just around HIV, because we as people, we don't live single issue lives. And so there's a lot there that we need to be concerned with. But this work here is my heart, is my passion, because it is something that will always be dear to me around HIV criminalization. So I'm happy to always talk about HIV criminalization with anybody, anytime, any day. And I just graduated from grad school, and so I now have a master's in student affairs and higher education. So I want to educate students, young people, about HIV criminalization, as well as other things around, their racial identity, their social development, and that sort of deal. And because they are our future, there are future prosecutors, public health people. They're everything, and so I want to encourage them to understand the real history, of this country, of the Black community, of activists, social movements. Like, I want to talk about all that kind of stuff for educating students around developing their multicultural competence and making them understand that they too can be social justice activists. All of us have the ability to do that. We just have to do that personal work within, as well as if you're a professional in any type of profession, you need to develop a social justice identity within your profession, within your professional identity. So I want to continue to talk about those things and help people really understand the importance of it, because it's sort of how I've evolved. And so I hope to write a book about my experience. It's been 10 years, and so there's a lot to share. I have some interesting things to share. And who knows, I may just decide to go to continue grad school and get a PhD in justice studies. So those are just some future aspirations that I have at the moment. But I do hope to continue my social justice work, whether it be in higher education or with another nonprofit. I'm enjoying being chair with involved with the Elizabeth Taylor's AIDS Foundation, being chair of the Social the Council of Justice Leaders, working with other people who've been prosecuted, and also using our platforms to talk about the issue. And so I'm happy to see that they're involved in the platform. I mean, the foundation is using their platform to do this campaign. And yeah, so it's great. And also stay connected to the HIV Justice Network, which is I'm currently involved, which is a global network of people living with HIV, but also people who are fighting HIV criminalization around the world. So yeah, that's well. And so if you want to you can find me on Facebook. I'm on Twitter, although I should tweet more, but I will in the future. Just taking a break right now for summer. And then you can also email me at rsuttle2000@gmail.com.
Come on. And thank you so much for sharing your heart, sharing your passion here with us, and continuing this conversation as well, and educating, definitely walking in your purpose. So I appreciate you again so much for joining me. If you all missed our first conversation, make sure that you check that out as well on CMP's YouTube page, and as well CMP's The Reckoning magazine, also Craig Washington. Very important story there that you so again, we don't want this conversation just to end tonight. So make sure that you like, share, subscribe, follow us on all our social media at CMP Tribe, and this video as well. And get involved, educate yourself. It's Pride Month, so we want to make sure that we take care of one another and stay healthy as we go about our business.
Absolutely.
Again, until the next time that I see you, always be good to yourself, and I will talk to you soon.
All right.